All right, before we get going here, if you're not already a subscriber, click the button and ring the bell so you don't miss anything. Thanks. A couple of months ago, while I was at the Tailhook Convention in Reno, I hosted episode 9 of the Fights On podcast. The topic of this one was LVC, which stands for Live, Virtual, and Constructive. LVC is an evolving concept that combines real flight ops with simulators to create scenarios that are both cost-effective and tactically relevant. This panel consists of 3 carrier aviation veterans, all who started in the Tomcat community, by the way, and their insights are amazing and in some cases mind-blowing. Thanks to Cubic for sponsoring this cutting-edge discussion and to Authentic Media for making this video available to my channel. I think you'll enjoy it, and as always, let me know your opinion in the comments section below. So here we go. All right, welcome to Fights On episode 9. This is sort of the graduation run for this series. And we're here with 3 highly qualified folks to talk about a range of topics. So we've got PK, Sonic, and my good friend Matt. And I'll let them give their mini bios, and then we'll get into the subject. So PK, tell the folks about your background.
So thanks for having us on, Mooch. I'm Paul Verner, I go by PK. I was a Tomcat guy in the 90s. A weapons school player, but one of the things that I focused on most exclusively was training, not only during my time on active duty, but afterwards, and now at Cubic as a Navy account executive. It's still the forefront of my thought.
Roger. Sonic?
Hey, thanks, Moose. Thanks for having us out here. Steve Hemanowski, call sign Sonic, F-14, F-18 Foxtrot background, Top Gun graduate and instructor, staff instructor, commanded VFA 102 and Carrier Air Wing 9, and most recently on my way last tour, deputy commander at the Naval Aviation Warfighting Development Center at NAUTIC.
Roger. And Matt?
Hey, thanks, Mooch. It's great to be up here with these guys. I'm Matt Arney, call sign Flounder. So I chose more the test route. After our time at Oceana, I was at F-14 Rio and then turned F-18 Wizzo. So I spent some time at VX-9, working closely with my friends at the Burning Bush at Top Gun on different system evolutions. And so then finished up recently. And just great to be here at Tailhook reunion with you guys and working on this great topic.
So we'll note that we're Tomcat heavy and Diamondback heavy, and neither of those things is a bad thing. So, Matt, let's start with you and talk about PLM. So I think there's some misunderstanding out in the world, especially with our generation, where we had maybe mode 1 or auto throttle, so we didn't have anything approaching magic carpet. So what is the technology? How is it used? And then we'll go into some of the mitigators as we're going along here.
Yeah, it's a great topic to lead off the conversation. And why is the F-14 Rio talking about PLM? Well, so I was the commanding officer at Whidbey Island recently, and so we had growlers up there. And so that was a big factor, and as I observed from that seat, the adoption of PLM in the fleet amongst the growler community.
So PLM stands for Pilot Landing Mode? Right?
Precision landing mode.
Precision, okay.
That's right. And so what PLM does is it's a system that basically, to dumb it down, it allows the pilot to put the thing on the thing and land there.
That sounds naval aviator proof.
Absolutely, yeah. So, but it's symbology in the HUD. It's not in the helmet, so it's in the HUD, and it's it's only, you can only engage it within certain parameters. So you have to be within those parameters, which when you're coming in for your landing, you're going to hit all those parameters. You engage the PLM, and then the symbology, you're putting that on where you want to land on the flight deck. You're putting in the ship speed manually into the system, and that's going to account for that ship movement. Now what it does, it is basically just by moving the stick forward and back, it's allowing you to adjust VSI. Tomcat guys, we had DLC, okay, a little DLC up, DLC down to kind of elevator up and down. But what PLM does is it allows you to capture that immediately. So it's very responsive. It's a great system. It doesn't help left and right, so you got to work line up. It's only for glide slope. And so it's a great technology. It's made landing on the ship, I mean, it's complex, but it's made it so much easier so that aircrew can spend, obviously we spend a lot of time training for landing on the ship, but we need to spend more of our time training for very complex tactics, very complex warfighting scenarios. We need to continue ways to make landing on the ship more administrative.
So I think few systems these days are a strong a strong contrast to when we were flying Tomcats, especially pre-DFCS Tomcats. So let me bring in the nose gunners here to talk about when you think of PLM versus just imagine coming into the break case one and, wings, gear, flaps, DLC, trim, hook.
Don't forget that.
Right? So, and then that's just the start of the variables, right? So it's fuel flow, AOA, VSI, and when you hear that basically it's now engage PLM, point the velocity vector at the 3-wire or the 2-wire, and land, how does that strike you?
Well, it's interesting as to Flounder's comment. As a CAG on our last deployment and going fully PLM air wing by the time we pushed away from the pier. Certainly, as an air wing commander, you look from the perspective of boarding rate and getting folks on and off the ship efficiently and effectively, so we can not be as vulnerable with the carrier, right? So, from that perspective, it was a wonderful addition and a wonderful tool to be able to, again, make sure you can successfully get on and off. And I will tell you, the Knights and Cats, you got significantly easier with the addition of PLM to the fleet. But with that being said, I think to Flounder's comment, while we do have to focus more on training, certainly in these what the looming very complex scenarios, I think there's an element in there of complacency that could creep into to both not only the aircrew but also the LSOs, because it just becomes so automatic with the way the system operates.
So you bring up a very topical point. So, because we're asking, okay, what if it doesn't work? During FCLPs, is it always PLM? Because what I'm hearing, and this topic came up in recent months on my channel, and these guys are saying, hey, Grandpa, it's always PLM. There's no such thing as like HUD out training when you're bouncing or whatever. So are there degraded modes? How does this affect training? How does this ecosystem work now?
Yeah. So I had a great conversation recently that we're going to air on the Fighter Pilot podcast here in a little bit. And in that conversation, I truly got to understand this, and that is that when you can't select PLM, you have other flight control problems, and those emergencies are the things that are driving you to a divert situation or blue water ops, either pull up alongside and eject or barricade situation or whatever that matrix, the divert and blue water ops matrix is driving you to. So with the redundancies that have been built into the system, if PLM's not working, that's not your problem. There's other problems.
So what you're saying is it's not that PLM's not working.
Yeah.
Right, so PLM is never not working.
PLM is never not working. If PLM might not work, it might not be engageable, but it's because you have got flight control problems or other problems, and those are your concerns. And so you're going to, for example, divert, go to a shore-based, landing strip, and be able to bring it in. So training in a manual mode doesn't make sense because A, the probability of that happening is so low with those flight control problems that we just typically don't see out there, and B, you're going to have all your focus on that event to land safely at a shore-based airstrip.
So let's pivot to training again.
Yeah.
Let's talk just nominal training track. So T45, I don't have PLM, right? So I'm in the training command, I'm still doing meatball lineup angled attack.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So now I get to the Hornet rag, Super Hornet rag, and I am using PLM from the jump, right? There's no such thing as no PLM landings in the Super Hornet rag.
Not anymore. That's correct.
Not anymore. So what was it before?
So before, years ago, I was the operations officer of VFA 106. So it was what we grew up with the number of FSLPs and all the regular landing modes, and then obviously practicing the degraded mode. But yeah, so right now it's PLM all the time.
So why did it change? Because the reliability of PLM, or our mindset accepted the reliability of PLM?
Yes, I think that's a valid answer, and as well as to Flounder's comments on the fact that if it doesn't work, you have bigger issues, and then with that, because of the redundancy built in and the availability, then we can start taking some of those flight hours and some of that other training opportunities and focus it somewhere else instead of just spinning laps around the pattern.
Because I think this is the problem that the graybeards are having.
Yeah.
Right? It just doesn't make sense to us.
Yeah, and so it started back in about 2016. when it was first brought into the aircraft, and it stems from the F-35's differential flight path, I think is what it's called in the F-35. And so it started coming into the fleet in 2016, but there were still elements in the hardware and software that needed to come about through the test community to finally get to the point. In February 2021 is when VFA 106 went out to the boat for the first time, all PLM, all levels of aircrew. And that's where we really saw full adoption of, we have the redundancies built in. We're now at the point in that matrix I talked about that we don't need to spend time training on PLM degraded modes. Okay?
So it's only about a year and a half old. I mean, this isn't old.
It had been used in the fleet before, but it was really that full adoption.
And prior to that, so for our 2018, 2019 cruise on Stenix, excuse me, the requirement was for the Cat ones or for the Nuggets was you had to do 25. I believe his number was 25 traps before you could actually go to PLM to start doing it. So 25 traps, old school way, for lack of a better term. You had to at least have 25 traps around the ship. So a lot of the Nuggets that were coming out for deployment through TISTA, probably into Comp 2X, they were still working on building up to the PLM. So by the time we got to the end of Comp 2X CAG, very happy. Everybody was PLM, obviously except for the E2s, certainly, right?
Well, so speak to that. What do you mean by that?
Well,
The
E2s do not have precision landing mode.
Right.
So
Okay.
E2s are still very old school.
Those guys are working.
Working hard to get aboard. So the point being is as the technology has matured, and we got the full redundancy in 2021. Before that, there was a requirement, kind of like we talked about. The number of FCLPs were staying the same, and then you still had to come out and have 25 traps in your logbook before you could go to PL.
But that's not a thing anymore.
Not anymore.
Okay.
No, yeah, they call it reverse proficiency, I think it was. But basically, and talking to other leaders of air wings, there was a requirement that every now and then you had to do a non-PLM landing. They don't have to do that anymore. That's
Right.
all. That's all gone. But really, we talk about the advancement of this kind of technology in landing. Another great conversation out there is you mentioned the T-45. As we look at follow-on trainers and where is landing on the boat going to go in the future, and when are we going to expose pilots to landing on the boat? We're unclear right now if the RFI for the new trainer is going to be no boat ops. Maybe it's going to be FCLP only. And a lot of people out there might be going, how can you wing aviators and not have them land on the boat?
Well, so we've already done that.
Yeah.
There's a test group of 30.
That's right.
that
Exactly.
got their wings without going to the boat,
Yep.
which, again, graybeards are kind of freaked out about that.
That's right.
And they're putting their finger in Kenny's chest,
Yeah.
the air boss, and kind of going, how do this happen? And he's, bullish on, hey, you just don't get it.
That's right. And I get it because, we need to leverage technologies and also find ways that we can, going out and doing FCLPs and landing airplanes on the boat, it beats it up. If we have wear and tear on the equipment, wear and tear on our people, and if we can get away from having to take student naval aviators out to boats, the ships themselves, we have so much problem getting them through shipyard availabilities, operationally ready to go out and deploy, that if we can relieve the aircraft carriers from that part of the process and do it smartly with technology, then I'm all for it because we need to spend our time focused on the war fighting.
So again, for context, back in the day, did you guys go to Lex?
Yep.
Okay. So PK is old enough to have gone to the Lexington CVT 16, right? That's not a thing anymore, just CVNs. And I know that, to your point, Flounder, carrier crews do not like doing training command CQ, right? So it's like, hey, we get a week home, except oops, now Sinatra just called and we got to go to sea for a week to do training command CQ with these scary guys that are all over the place and so forth and so on, right? They don't follow taxi directors. They, it's like, not only is it a drag to do the additional at sea period, this is scary at sea period, right? So now the idea is maybe that won't be a thing at all, right? And again, we're leveraging technology, which is sort of the theme of this episode of the podcast. So let's pivot from PLM to talk about BFM. So that's another thing. Tomcat guys big part of our TNR matrix was air-to-air. I was just talking to our good friend Bio Baranek yesterday about his days as a Top Gun instructor when I was in VF-32, Cat 1, 1985, we're doing FARP. And FARP's all about air-to-air. Right? And so now, these days, if you look at a Super Hornet squadron and you look at their TNR matrix, maybe there's less air-to-air. And then when you talk about the nature of BFM, is it, speed angels on the left, speed angels on the right, 350 knots turning in, or is it speed angels on the left, speed angels on the right, Fox 2, you're dead, right? Or I'm, rear quarter setup and over the shoulder, aim 9, whatever letter we're on now, right, kind of thing. So how has technology affected BFM? And are we hazarding the threat in any way with the way we have morphed it? So, Sonic, over to you on that one.
Well, it's as technology's advanced over the years. Yeah, I'll go back to, and probably just shows my age. And certainly haven't been a staff instructor. I look at the perspective. We've been talking about BFM going away for well over 60 years. This conversation started back in the 60s. We were never going to have to go to emerge again. We were never going to see another airplane again, and obviously we proved that was not the case. And I also think that certainly as technology continues to mature, and as we all know, we no longer hold the significant technological advantage that we had in the past. So, as nations come up with similarly configured aircraft with the same technology, I think it'd be foolish for us to believe that we are never going to go to emerge again and continue to go down that path. So, now, with that being said, the capability, the weapons that we have, the helmet-mounted queuing, the joint helmet-mounted queuing systems that we have, to your point, yes, speed angels left, speed angels right, Fox 2. And that point is just like we always ask, you're still going to. That's the shot. That's what it looks like. We're going to take that, as always, to recognize that opportunity. But I would sit there and think, I think it's foolish not to continue to train to BFM. And I know speaking of the graybeards, there's certainly plenty of graybeards out there saying, why am I spending dollars burning, the flight hours and the flight life on our aircraft, our airframes to continue to BFM? But I sit there, in many respects, I think it's something we still need to train to prepare, because in a world in an airspace that's going to be heavily dominated by electronic effects and everything else that we have, I think eventually they're going to null each other out, and we're going to find ourselves coming to those merges. So I think that's still going to continue to happen. So I think we still need to train to it. Additionally, the other piece of this too, which over years that. The reason, they only look at it, well, we're never going to go to emerge, but we all know that taking young aircrew and letting them fly that aircraft up to the very edge of its capabilities and its performance characteristics becomes very, shall I say, confidence enhancing, right? So, when you take those aircraft, and even today, you get flying in a Super Hornet and get up there, and we start getting up into that airspace where it's, there's hardly any zero airspeed on the airframe, and you're still moving your nose around, and you're still threatening people. To this day, I'm always still amazed that, it's one of those things. Airplanes, I'm in the cockpit. I'm like, airplanes should not be able to do this, right? But with that being said, for the pilots in the front that are flying it, they're testing their skills, learning the limits of the aircraft, and being able to understand their airframe better. And I think it becomes anecdotal on what is the benefit from that, but I think it's critically important that we still continue to press aircrew to be able to fly that aircraft to the very edge, and continue to build their confidence levels as they go. So, I think it's a twofold piece. I think we'd be foolish to not believe we're going to go to merges again if and when we get into another engagement. And secondly, I think we need to continue to enhance the confidence of our young aircrew. And the same graybeards will sit there and tell you that they knew their aircraft better than we know ours today, and to some extent that might be the case, and how well they understand their NATOPS, how well they understand the flight characteristics. So I think this is another element to drive our younger aviators to get into the books, to get into EM diagrams. All those things are still a factor. And last part of it too, in this day and age, we talk about complex scenarios, we talk about very, very complex flights, we talk about the training that is involved. Let's face it, the other part of this too, this is it's fun, right? I mean, BFM engagements are fun, and it's okay to have fun in this business and to be able to go out, you and one of your friends, or you and a senior officer, whatever the case may be, and go out there and tie it up and see, and test your skills against each other. Because whether we like to acknowledge that in the real world anymore or not, that's actually still a thing. So,
Well,
I think
if
there's
fun equals, it gives you confidence.
Absolutely.
Right? So when you get yourself in a situation, I think the war in Ukraine proves your point in terms of the visual arena and the idea that it could just devolve into sticks and stones and, sort of a merge.
Absolutely.
Right? So you've got to know your capabilities. You've got to be confident with going right to max G and, rate in the airplane at potentially low altitude and, all of this sort of thing we're seeing over there. It's pretty amazing. And I think that's a cautionary tale for us. So are TNR matrices reflecting what you're talking about? Because when you talk about graybeards, the graybeards aren't hassling you about this. I think what you mean is 3 and 4 stars and the bean counters.
Correct.
Who are trying to eke out savings. Like, hey, if we have our next generation trainer that doesn't need to have a launch bar and really beefy struts and a big fat tailhook, that'd be a lot cheaper, right? And so they're kind of hassling the Airbus. So, right, you get it, right? Oh, yes, I do. Yes, sir. And so the pressure comes from either the money people or the people charged with, like Bucket and Kenny,
Yeah.
right? Graybeards, we're on your side, baby.
and that's-
we want you to,
good point.
shake it up.
Valid. But
Because that's what we're asking. It's like, you mean
Yeah.
they're not dogfighting anymore?
Yeah.
so I think
Which is a great point as we're in the development of FAXX and NGAT. What is this going to look like in the 2040s? And because I think F-18s, F-35s, I think we're going to see them doing BFM until somebody decides, some bean counter decides we can't do it anymore because of service life. Hopefully that doesn't get to be the case, because I agree. Same reason we still do low altitude training. It's the confidence as a pilot, as aircrew, that we can operate our aircraft.
But, okay, so we got to put a stick in the ground around that point. Right?
Yeah.
So what you're saying, as fresh from Nautic and DCAG and CAG 9 and so forth, we still need to be able to do BFM. This is a real world threat. It's not just fun. This is we're going to see the merge, right? So that pressure is going to happen. The comptrollers and the other guys are going to, your Optar is going to go down by X because of other budgetary pressures. So we've got to make sure, warfighters got to make sure that that doesn't happen, because this isn't just theoretical, this is existential, right?
absolutely. Oh, and the
Not
other
to put
part.
words in your mouth.
No. Well, and I think a little bit later on in the conversation we may get into our TNR matrices and what they represent and how we and I think and absolutely we probably need to revisit a lot of our TNR matrices, and obviously I think except part of this conversation we'll get there, so I want to get the cart before the horse, but so I think it does become an existential threat. And I think to your point, we do need to continue to reevaluate where we are with our TNR matrices, and I have a couple comments about that a little bit later, which I think might shape some of the conversation as well.
Roger, no doubt. So, PK, let's turn to you, and let's talk about this concept of LVC, because again, another thing, Brave New World element of that is when you talk to us circa mid-90s, and we'd go over to the 2E6 or the 2F95, that was a simulator, right? So you're either climbing into the airplane or you're meeting with wheels and going into the 2F95. Now that there's so much more granular stuff, and a concept of this binary, you got sims and you got real world, is very archaic. So talk to us about what is LVC and what are the things that are going to unfold with this concept.
Sure. So let's start off with why do you even need it? And it goes back to the whole idea of what are the benefits of doing BFM beyond the stake in the ground that says I have to be ready in case I get to emerge in the real world. It's not just till the trigger pull, it's actually fighting to the logical conclusion of whatever it is. So if the weapon doesn't work the way it's supposed to, i.e. a PK miss, then you're going to go, you have to continue to fight. And those concepts are built upon to a point where you're proficient. And we've developed a training program and a building block approach so that you are proficient. One of the things that separates fighter pilots from non-fighter pilots is the ability to operate plus or minus 30 degrees of the horizon and beyond. And that visual perception of the 3D world is sometimes much different than folks that never get beyond those parameters. So thinking spatially in 3D is also extended beyond into the beyond visual range fight. And because of the pure threat problem, because we no longer are able to train against that kind of a problem with the physical range constraints that we have, it's a much larger volume of airspace that we have to be concerned about, because there's a lot, and also the multi-domain side of the house that we can't necessarily trigger all the time at will in training. We have to find ways of presenting a cognitive perspective for the aircrew to learn in, and to recognize, hey, the situation is unfolding the way we think it's supposed to on timeline, or it's not, and we have to do something different. What cues do I have in my cockpit, where they're coming in from somebody yelling at me in the headset, or from something on my displays that says, yes, no, go do something different? So how do you build on that? And this gets to the LVC question. So there are camps out there that say, well, L and V and C, and we're doing LVC. So in other words, separate domains, where in live I've got constructives that are presented, and we call that embedded training. When it's in the virtual world, in the simulator, and I've got constructives, okay, that's a normal, logical feature of that environment. Being able to blend the two is really, I think, the end state answer to addressing all of the challenges that we have with our current training environment. Meaning, I need to see not only a specific advanced type of threat that I may not see until night one, but I have to see a lot of them out there, because that's what a pure force is capable of generating. It's just not a 2v1, it's going to be a lot versus a hell of a lot. So working through those things, and I would say that we're still learning what that's supposed to look like. Our tactics, techniques, and procedures are evolving. And to validate those things, we're going to need some very specific environments where we can use down to the pulse level, an effective model. But once we've figured that out, it's now about effects-based training proficiency for folks that are at home station and when they're on the boat and there's a new threat that's popped up and you're in strike ops trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to take this down? So I do think that there is a place for that new kind of environment where we can blend the two of them and address the deficiencies that the standalone environments have today.
So you mentioned sort of in passing the live virtual constructive. So let's drill down on what each one of those are.
Sure.
Because I was talking to Dave yesterday about it, and I couldn't get my head around the difference between the V and the C.
Right.
And even as he was saying it, it was like he was speaking Mandarin Chinese or something. I'm like, it's like one of those things, I just don't get it. It's like, Bitcoin. I just don't get it. Right?
Yeah.
So can we
Sure.
like drill down?
So you had an episode on your channel a couple of weeks ago where you're talking about kitting out your simulator, and that it's not just a video game, but it is a no kidding, honest representation from a we call it man-in-the-loop environment. So it gives you physics-based kind of performance for the platform that you're simulating. And it's down to buttonology in the cockpit. So if I push this button, and if I were in the real cockpit, it would cause something to happen. The same thing would happen in the simulator. So that's great for muscle reps and sets, but man-in-the-loop sims, I am in a dome, or I'm on a desktop trainer which has multiple displays, and I'm performing with a platform as if it were a real platform. But it's all computer-based sitting there. Now, how do you interact with that environment sitting in the cockpit? The constructives that are computer-generated forces, okay, behave in a manner that is as authentic as you would hope them to be. So you're fighting against a computer, and let's take it in a BFM kind of an environment. So the computer is going to be based on lookup tables or rules, trying to do things to get in a position where it can shoot you. Okay, and you're fighting against that using the techniques that you've learned or figured out that are going to keep you to the point where you can shoot them. And that's how you're doing your engagement with the world. If I have another simulator linked up with me, and I have another person who happens to be very skilled at what they're doing, it becomes a much more credible fight. And that realism is important when we want to talk about the right reps and sets of muscle memory and how to execute the tactics, techniques, and procedures we think are the right ones to use. So we spend a lot of time in simulators because it's a lot cheaper than burning gas and real airplanes for flight life. But that's a place where we do some of that learning. Now, of course, in the live platform, I'm actually strapping on a piece of metal and gas is going into vapor in the back end. And I'm actually
feeling G.
Yeah, I'm feeling the physiological,
O2.
psychological effects
Yeah.
are actually the features that are not present. So when you're under a heavy G load and you're having the comms not perfect, like you have in the comfortable confines of a simulator, you're going to miss things, and that is going to degrade your live performance. Well, you're going to, and that's why oftentimes we say you're not going to go to war in a simulator. You have to be able to do this in the real world. And thinking under G is a little different than just sitting here in 1G, calm, cool, collected, and comfortable.
Yeah, but if I could, so back when we were working the Tailhook 95, it was a training degradation to go into the simulator.
Right.
Whereas now, what we're seeing with the simulation we're looking for is that we're talking about scenarios that you cannot build in a live environment. That we're talking, again, the ranges and the training range constraints, and also, systems and tactics that maybe we don't want to do out there in the live world. That we need to have that virtual and constructive world to be able to do that and train to the complexity of the fight without showing our hand for other people watching. There's a lot of elements into this, so it's not just let's say wear and tear and save gas and back to the bean counters. It's creating the environment that we can train to complex scenarios with, and I've been here in LBC for, 10, 12 years. And it seems like every time we do an LBC event, it's a big deal. It's like, hey, we're going to do this in 3 months. Let's get some folks out of Lemoore and some, folks operating out of San Diego and create this exercise. Whereas 10, 15 years from now, it's going to have to be, the Skedzo on a daily thing. Okay, you've got this event and you're in the simulator, you're flying an airplane. We got, it's a routine thing, so we can be training those complex scenarios using all these tools.
So two things on that to actually follow up what you said and follow up what you said. So the other piece of the live that is important that we need to keep in mind, and some of the inside joke at Nautic is the L in LVC is not silent. So so we need to fly live airplanes. So for all the things that PK said, but at the same time, this goes down to we talk about training. You don't forget our training goes down to our maintainers as well, right? And for the people that turn the wrenches and make sure that we got up aircraft to go flying. And so we need to make sure that we are exercising those systems in we're testing the end-to-end capability of the aircraft in those environments as well. So when air wings come out to Fallon, whether it's the ARPS or whether it's for air wing training, our avionics folks are getting trained on the systems. Are they working? Are the quadrants in RWR gear? It is what it is now, but is the radar functioning? Are our link networks up? For our orties, they're building and constructing weapons and making sure that they're putting them all together right. When they go on the jet, everything's talking to the weapons, and the weapons talking back to the jet. So we need to be able to do all the end-to-end testing so that we know, and obviously anybody that comes out to do Fallon, that they're taking up fully groomed jets ready for combat when they push away from the pier. So there's that aspect of it. And as far as the rest of the LVC stuff goes, I think it is important to not only in a training environment here, and this is where the beauty of this concept comes into play, is not only when we're here ashore based and we're training and working up towards whatever the next wicket is in the OFRP, now we have the capability to actually do this at sea, right? We all know, and certainly again for those of us who are interested in TNR matrices and making sure things stay green for the powers that be. We also know that as soon as we push away from that pier and we're out doing the operational tasking required during deployment, our operational readiness, at least as far as the way the TNR matrices go, they start to degrade over time, right? Anybody that's been out on deployment in the past 10, 15 years going, is there anywhere in the Western Pacific or anywhere coming across the Atlantic I can get some air-to-ground work to make sure I can bump up those numbers and we're good on, in case that has to pop up. So, our ability now to be able to do this in an environment, even in a shipboard environment, certainly now we have the opportunity to level our readiness a little bit more instead of just accepting that graceful degradation as we go through a 6, 7, 8 month deployment.
So that old FNG thing and go find the simulator?
Yeah, that's right. That's no longer a joke.
So when I hear what Flounder was saying in terms of the difference between the V and the C, and for the record, you've heard about it for 12 years. I heard about it yesterday.
Okay.
So,
Right.
how detached have I been? But the C, and this is to what PK was saying as well, is the application of the V, right? So V is, like you were saying, PK, this knob, this switch, that's the V, but the constructive is the operational scenarios. And I appreciate what you were saying about we can create scenarios that you just can't do at a Fallon range or on your way translanding. You can't drop bombs on lodges, not intentionally anyway. And that sort of thing. So is that right, the way I'm sort of framing it there?
Yeah, it is, but I'll also offer that to do blended LVC, where you have live and virtual elements or environments together operating. So you're in a simulator and you're actually flying form on a live jet. You look outside your window and you see the live airplane. You go up underneath and clean and dry check him, and he's got the weapons that he
So
really
he's
has.
actually
and
airborne.
You see them. Yeah,
He's is he
absolutely
seeing
airborne.
you?
No,
Oh,
so
okay.
he doesn't
Okay.
see it. But within visual arena, we have enough tools to actually work through what we need from a learning perspective. Okay, we have enough metal out there to be targets, to do the learning objectives we need. In the beyond visual range fight, to the discussion we've been having about the numbers and the type of problem that we're going to be dealing with against a pure fight, that's where we have trouble replicating it. And also have to consider, too, the security element of it. So we don't want to be sharing the tactics and techniques and procedures ahead of game day with the threat that we're going to be going up against, right?
Probably not,
So
yeah.
it has to be encrypted, it has to be secure. But one of the benefits that brings is I don't have to actually light off emitters on my platform to show the threat what I'm doing. Okay, those can all be actually done constructively and pop up on the other platforms as if it were real effects going on.
Okay.
So there is that advantage that we can bring in, and we've learned these lessons over the last few years. The one recent advanced technology demonstration that finished up in 2018 demonstrated that there were actually 6 capability spheres that you needed to meet or address in order to do this right. And encryption was one of them, because you have to be able to protect the TTPs that you want to use on game day.
So I'm putting on my OPSO hat
Yeah.
against what you just said. So is my event a 1 live jet, 3 virtual jets to go to Dare County and do
It could be.
strafing or pop-up bomb deliveries? I mean, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, it could be that, or it could be a 2-ship going out on an opposed strike as a workup element before they deploy, say, to Fallon, and they need to have constructive surface threats that are going to engage them if they come off the route or aren't effectively terrain masking if we're working in an altitude or altitude dense environment. Certainly, you could have constructive adversaries from an airborne perspective rolling in on them, checking out their awareness and what they're going to do in terms of pressing forward or pitching in and engaging them. So those decisions that you can help them learn to stay on timeline to ultimately get to Dare County, roll in, deliver practice bombs, come off, so that you have that live element of training under G and return gets much more enriched. So you actually not only are checking off boxes from a proficiency perspective of releasing ordnance, but you also are getting some of the benefit of a more complex threat environment at the same time.
So let's go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is a great thing. What is the vision of LVC? And I don't know if there's a great vision statement out there that talks about it, because, Mooch, you bring up a great point. Am I just going down to Dare County and I don't have to fly 3 of the airplanes? They're in simulators. Is that the best use of the technology? Whereas I think a lot of what we talk about is, much more complex stuff where, I've got an adversary there and flying an F-16, but I'm in a Super Hornet F-35 and I've got virtual wingmen from simulators, but that F-16 looks like, something else in all my systems. And also that one airplane has wingmen. And so I'm targeting and doing all these things that I should be doing, but I've only got one actual physical adversary out there. And so what is the vision of LVC? And there's a lot of, you can go over here and look at augmented reality in the visor so that you actually can see these folks in your joint helmet queuing system. You can see your adversary, and you can do a BFM engagement using augmented reality while you're flying your airplane. I think all these things are coming together, but I don't know if they're coming together purposefully in the industry.
So that's a huge point. So talk to Chebs, Edward Chevy, who was in Brand X when I was a Cat 2, and another Tomcat guy, and he's saying that he's listening to industry, which is his job as NavAir. He's like, okay, guys, I get it, right? I'm all in, but what's the path to actual completion and actual something that can be used by the squadrons? That's what he gets frustrated around the difference between the concept and the practical application, which is like, I'm the OPSO, I got to execute the OPTAR grant, and I need to go to the skipper and go, we're flying these events, and this is how many real airplanes we're going to need. MO cares about that, and here's how many virtual ones. And so this is just a practical sort of thing of, okay, you guys go to the sim room, whatever that looks like,
Right.
And you guys man up an airplane.
Right.
So that's where he's frustrated.
Yeah, but there's also, to think about the integration piece too. So what are your Aegis and counter-air warfare players doing for training? Can they be participating along with E2D in a tub somewhere and connected across the Navy's continuous training environment?
Great point.
To work with those folks. There's a lot. It opens up for a lot more training opportunities if it's laid out correctly. And the good news is, I'll say that there have been enough demonstrations to understand what's needed, and it's actually now bending several of the pipes to understand, okay, what do I have to do on my platform to be able to plug in? Okay, and that is, so is it just an operational flight program modification, or do I need extra hardware? Because all those things are fighting for resource dollars, and typically they're going to be competing against a new combat capability that we want. But the way that you ultimately bend it is through using open standards and protocols, and really following some of the lessons learned, so that you can actually deliver those options in training.
Yeah, but all that makes the main issue more complicated, because if we're talking about an Aegis class cruiser potentially sitting pierside, participating in this thing, now we're talking different TICOMs, and so who's the voice of the customer here? And does that customer even know what they want? Because they're not as read up, and there's all these great technologies that are coming from industry. So it's a complex vision that one person is.
But answer that question.
Yeah.
Who is the voice of the customer, right? Because
I think it's Admiral Aquilino, right?
well, is it though? I know he's the demand signal, but
Right.
in terms of program of record, in terms of husbanding available dollars, executing the budget. So PK, you when you were talking about where does the Aegis fit, I'm thinking, and this is back to you, Sonic, the first time I went to Fallon, it was Strike U, right? This little white cinder block building, like away from everything. And this was fresh after the Baca Valley disaster. And the same demand signal that created Top Gun created Strike U. So then I go back as a Super JO, and I'm like, hey, we're going to Strike U. And I'm like, okay, over to the little white cinder. And I'm like, here's this NSOC, right? Like, wow. And then when I went back as the OPSO, now Alpha Whiskey is on the deck with us. So it went from that sort of myopic air wing only to strike group sort of conception, and then it's the joint arena beyond that. So when we talk about these efficiencies and how Nautic now, or NSOC goes to Nautic, are we able to adapt, and is this something that is going to be executable, and does it create the right kind of readiness because also what you said about the irony of going to sea is your readiness goes down.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, people don't think about that. So all of the practical application of this promise and the funding piece, you asked the perfect question, because this is where it just gets hung up, right? Who's the voice of the customer? And we just leave it with that sort of rhetorical question.
You bring up a very good point. Although we've been for years, we've been checking boxes green. I'm green. I've done this. I'm like, have we though? Right? If you went out and just touched, if you went out and just punched in a 9 line in your aircraft now, can I log that as close air support? Right? If I went out and I'm out over the water, I'm transiting to Whiskey 72, or I'm out over, heading out over 283, whatever the case may be, and I fly over a ship, can I log that as double SC?
The skipper
Right?
says yes.
Right, right, and that's and that, and
Is it toward the end of the course?
and exactly. So and so we sit there and and I'm like, all right, well, we logged that, but did we really actually execute that mission? So again, to that point, it becomes a consumption tool. So I think on top of all all of the goodness, the ability to train to high-end threats and not give away our secrets, the ability to maximize that training in a much more realistic capability while spending less money and not the thousands of dollars to get an aircraft airborne. I think now also it provides an opportunity for the paradigm shift of let's really go back in and look at our training and readiness and what are we actually producing, right? Whether your job is a squadron CO, whether your job is an air wing commander, your job is to produce combat capability. Right? We've always used the TNR matrix to, kind of as the check in the block on, yep, I did that, and I'm combat ready. But at the same time, as we all know, if our readiness starts to degrade, right, and we submit our regular reporting up the chain, even though you might not be green across the board, the squadron CO, ultimately the air wing commander, can sit there and say, yes, I may be yellow here, but I am ready for tasking, I'm ready for combat, and I will be green by this point. So, in the end, you still leave it back up to the operational commander, the squadron CO, the air wing commander, and I think that's great. But at the same time, I think it becomes a very nebulous thing, and what training are we actually getting? And I used to tell my guys all the time, if you're going out to fly red air, and I know that the air boss is never a big fan of taking blue aircraft, blue tails, and flying them in red air. Again, the wonders of LVC, we can now actually decrease the numbers required to meet our requirements for training. But at the same time, I sit there and go, I used to tell my guys,
he's not a fan because of your expending fleet.
Yes,
is that why he's
yes,
not a fan?
Just to fly, just to put a piece of metal in the sky.
Okay.
So here's another opportunity where we'll help out the overall health of the flight line by not having to put aircraft up just to fly red air. The other piece is I used to tell my squadron at the time, I go, if you're flying red air because we have to, then you're only logging the 2 Kilo 4. Right? You're only logging red air. I don't care that you turned the FLIR on and you looked at something. I don't care that you saw a surface shift and you did whatever. You are logging 2 Kilo 4 only because that is what we were tasked to do.
That's truth in reporting.
And that is truth in reporting.
Yeah, and it allows people to understand how much are we actually using aircraft for these missions, and so that those bean counters then hopefully take that data. What you're hoping for as a leader on the flight line is you're hoping that some people's taking that information and making smarter programming decisions with that truth in reporting.
Yeah, and in fact, truth in training, I'll just put that up at one higher level. We've done great work at Naval Aviation Enterprise with data on getting the availability of Super Hornet on the flight line up. And it's taken the enterprise to actually look at hard numbers and challenge how we do business. Okay, and it has resulted in very good work over the last couple of years. The same thing has to happen in training. And how do you get the data in training? Well, to your point, you can either cap it by saying you're only going to report on this particular thing if you're flying this event, or alternatively, you can start taking advantage of a common environment or a common set of tools and saying, okay, what you did in the simulator actually is equivalent for purposes of X. And those actually could generate not only algorithms, machine learning to help you with a predictive understanding of the health of the air wing, the health of a squadron, the health of an individual section or division, because you've got more data on how they're performing. And yet includes wiring them up, pulse ox meters, and looking at how well they're sleeping at night, giving them Oura rings or a Garmin watch so they actually are checking their sleep patterns and seeing, okay, no, I'm actually making data-driven decisions instead of just my gut. And what was that gut reaction? Or it's based on our own experiences. And we all know as we get new technologies online that kind of is all new ground, uncertainty for senior leaders on how we're going to trust that data or trust that system is actually going to deliver the result at the end of the day. So I do think in an environment like LVC, where you now have everything wired up essentially, you can go back and look at the data. You can look at the performance. You can look at changes to the environment when I put in a different constructive weapon in the mix, what has happened as a result of that. So I think we're on the cusp of being able to actually turn to a paradigm shift where data is actually driving decisions in training.
Yeah, and measuring the effectiveness
Yeah.
of what we're doing.
Right.
That's going away from just check the box screen
Yeah.
to are we actually being effective,
Yeah.
and are we purposely collecting data that we can analyze and help make decisions.
And I think to kind of follow up on where we're going with that, and you highlighted the 1984 Strike U coming back as NSOC, and you look at some of the things that we're focusing on, the changes that have happened for the last couple of years at Nautic for air wing training. As a matter of fact, is we've driven this, we've changed the syllabus to, instead of everyone shows up and it's the large force strike, we're going to go do that. We started focusing more on training to skill sets that are going to be necessary in combat scenarios. So a lot more focus on individual skill sets, not like, hey, can we get the 28 plane gaggle together, take off, fly out to the range, do some work, and then come back and land successfully. No kidding, focusing on training to skill sets that we know that are going to be necessary if and when that combat happens.
So this has been a fantastic way to end the Fight Zone series. Thanks to Cubic for sponsoring it. PK, Sonic, and Flounder, thanks for joining us. I hope our paths cross again very soon.
Thanks, Mooch.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider using the super thanks, the heart icon below, or become a patron at patreon.com/wardcarroll. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.